They planned to humiliate my daughter at her wedding, to destroy her in front of everyone she loved. I'm 74 years old. I built a billion-dollar company from nothing. I understand power and consequences. I thought my fighting days were over. I was wrong. The most important fight of my life happened at my daughter's wedding. Before I tell you how I stopped them, I want to know where you're watching from. Drop a comment below. Let me know you're here. The anger I felt wasn't hot rage. It was cold and clear. They saw an old man and thought I was weak. They were wrong. I've been protecting my family for 50 years, and they threatened my daughter. My daughter Sarah is a talented artist with a big heart. She fell for Mark, whose family had old money, the Harringtons, wealthy, entitled people. From the start, Mark's mother, Eleanor, looked down on Sarah. She didn't think Sarah was good enough for their family. The engagement dinner showed their true colors. We met at their expensive club. Eleanor spent 20 minutes talking about the guest list. Then she looked at my wife Helen and said, "We'll need to vet your side of the family for the seating chart. We have to be careful." It was an insult. My wife smiled and said, "Our family was presentable," but I saw the hurt in her eyes. Mark loved Sarah, but he was completely controlled by his mother. The real problem was his older brother Charles. At dinner, Charles leaned over and said, "Quite a step up for your girl, isn't it? She's landed on her feet." I didn't react. I just remembered what he said. It told me everything about how they viewed us. Eleanor took over all the wedding planning. She rejected every idea we had about music, flowers, even the cake. Sarah came home crying, "Dad, I feel like a guest at my own wedding." She was losing herself to their demands. I promised her it would be okay, but I knew I needed a real plan. 6 weeks before the wedding, Sarah called me in panic. Eleanor had planned a pre-wedding brunch, but Sarah learned the truth from Mark's cousin. It wasn't a brunch. It was a presentation where the Harrington women would give Sarah advice about marriage. Really, they planned to criticize her background, her career, her entire life in front of all their friends. "They're going to destroy me, Dad," she said. "They'll show everyone why I'm not good enough." That's when I stopped being a retired grandfather. They had declared war on my daughter. They made one big mistake. They thought I would play by their rules. I hung up and went to my study. I sat at my desk. The anger was there, but I used it as fuel, not as my guide. I took out a legal pad and wrote one word at the top: countermeasures. They wanted a presentation. I would give them one they'd never forget. My first move was to find out exactly what they were planning. Eleanor Harrington thought she was untouchable. That made her sloppy. People like her loved to show off their plans. I called an old friend who knows how to find information. "Arthur," I said, "I need to know about the Harringtons. Did Eleanor book a room at the Crestmore Hotel for a brunch in 3 weeks? And who is helping her plan it?" A day later, I had a name: Lydia Shaw, a young event planner who was too excited about working with the rich Harringtons. I found her email online. I sent her a fake email. I pretended to be a writer for a fancy magazine. I said I wanted to write about their special brunch tradition. I asked for details about the presentation. She fell for it completely. She was so proud of herself. She sent me their whole plan in a document. The subject line said, "Harrington Sterling Wedding, Bridal Brunch Agenda." My simple lie worked. She handed me their playbook without a second thought. That's the thing about people like the Harringtons. They never expect to be challenged. I opened it, and there it was, in crisp, elegant typeface. 11:15 a.m. Welcome remarks by Mrs. Eleanor Harrington. 11:30 a.m. A Harrington welcome, traditions and expectations. Presentation by Mrs. Beatrice Harrington, Mark's grandmother. 11:45 a.m. Managing a household, from staff to social obligations. Presentation by Mrs. Charlotte Harrington, Mark's aunt. 12 p.m. The Art of Being a Harrington Wife, a Modern Perspective. Presentation by Ms. Victoria Harrington, Mark's sister. 12:15 p.m. Open floor for additional advice and well wishes. The audacity was breathtaking. It was a systematic deconstruction. They were going to lecture my daughter, an independent, successful artist, on how to be a proper servant to their family name. They would strip her of her identity in front of 50 of their closest, most judgmental friends. But the agenda alone wasn't enough. I needed their words. I needed to know the specific insults they planned to cloak as advice. This required a more direct approach. I remembered the tipsy cousin, the one who had warned Sarah, Cassandra. She was a black sheep, a young woman who clearly found the family pomp ridiculous. I found her on social media. Her profiles were a rebellion against the Harrington aesthetic. Vibrant, artistic, a little messy. She was a photographer. I sent her a direct message. I was blunt. Cassandra, this is Sarah's father. I know about the brunch. I know what they're planning to do to my daughter. I need your help to stop it. I didn't expect a reply, but an hour later my phone buzzed. They're monsters, her message read. I have audio. My hand tightened around the phone. Audio. We met at a quiet coffee shop away from her family's usual haunts. Cassandra was nervous, her eyes darting around the room. She slid a thumb drive across the table. I recorded their planning meeting last week. I knew it was wrong. I tried to tell Mark, but he just said, Mom knows best. She looked down. I'm ashamed to be related to them. I took the drive. You're doing the right thing. That night, in the silence of my study, I listened. It was worse than I imagined. Eleanor's voice, crisp and cold, directing the performance. Beatrice, you'll emphasize the importance of bloodline. Gently, of course. Mention how we've always married, appropriately. Charlotte's nasal tone discussing the unseemliness of a wife having a career. It invites gossip. A Harrington wife's work is the family. And Victoria, the worst of all, sneering about Sarah's bohemian friends and how she would need to distance herself from that element. They were going to eviscerate her. They had rehearsed it. I listened to the entire recording twice. I transcribed the key passages. I now had their playbook. I knew every move they intended to make. The element of surprise, their greatest weapon, was now mine. Now, most people would have called the police or made a scene, but I didn't, because I knew something they didn't. I had something better than anger. I had leverage. The cold focus got stronger. The planning was over. It was time to fight back. They wanted a quiet war of whispers. I was going to hit them with everything I had. I sat in the dark for a long time after listening to that recording. They weren't just snobs. They were predators. My wife found me hours later. You've heard, she said. I've heard, I said. She sat down. What are we going to do? If we make a scene, it will ruin the wedding for Sarah. If we don't, they'll hurt her. She was right. They had set a trap with no way out. I leaned forward. Helen, we're not going to make a scene. We're going to give them exactly what they want. A presentation. She looked confused. What? They want to give advice? Fine. We'll give them advice. But it will be the last advice they ever give. The plan became clear. I wasn't going to yell or threaten. I was going to speak in a language they understood. Consequences. Money consequences. Social consequences. I picked up my notepad. On the left, I wrote their names. On the right, I wrote their weaknesses, their money problems, their secrets. The Harrington fortune looked strong, but it had cracks. I just had to find them. The anger was still there, but now it was focused. They went after my daughter's heart. I would go after the thing they loved most, their family name. I started with Eleanor. Her power came from her social standing. I found out she was stealing from her own family charity. Not a lot, but enough. Enough for everyone to know. I just had to make sure they found out at the right moment. Charles was next. He was arrogant. He ran the family's investments and made a bad bet. He put $5 million into a company that didn't even have real technology. The whole thing was about to fall apart. I just had to make sure people found out when it would hurt the most. Beatrice and Charlotte were easier. Beatrice had a secret first marriage she hid for 40 years. Charlotte had a gambling problem and sold family jewelry, replacing it with fakes. These weren't crimes, but in their world, the truth could hurt more than lies. Victoria was the meanest but weakest. Her whole life was being a Harrington. I found out her husband had a girlfriend. One email could ruin her, but that was too simple. I wanted something better. The plan was coming together. I needed a way to show my advice. That would be as public as their brunch. I couldn't just tell the newspapers. That would still hurt Sarah. The answer was in their own plan. The open floor for additional advice. They left that door open. I would walk through it. I would go to the brunch. I would act like a happy father. When it was time for advice, I would stand up. But my advice wouldn't be spoken. It would be shown. I contacted a designer I used to work with. I gave her the documents about Eleanor's stealing, Charles's bad investment, Beatrice's secret marriage, Charlotte's fake jewelry. I need a slideshow, I told her. Make it look nice, like it's part of the wedding. Call it A Father's Advice. Know your new family. She looked at the documents. Then she looked at me. She understood. You want to destroy them from the stage. I want to give them the power to destroy themselves, I said. She smiled. I'm in. Then I called the hotel's AV technician. He was a young man who didn't like rich snobs. I paid him to make sure my slideshow would appear on the big screen and couldn't be turned off. Now came the hard part, waiting. 3 days. I didn't sleep much. I went over the slides again and again. Every detail had to be perfect, because once I walked into that ballroom, there was no going back. The plan was ready. It used their own stage against them. They wanted to hurt my daughter with words. I would stop them with facts. The morning of the brunch arrived, a bright, cloudless Saturday, the kind of day meant for happiness. I dressed with deliberate care, a dark, impeccably tailored suit, not a statement of wealth, but of authority, a uniform. Helen kissed my cheek, her hand lingering on my arm. Her eyes held a silent question. I gave a single, slight nod. The plan was in motion. The hotel ballroom was fancy and tense. I saw the Harrington women gathered around Eleanor, looking pleased with themselves. Sarah was with them, forcing a smile. When she saw me, her smile became real for a moment. I gave her a reassuring wave. I took my seat at the family table. I made polite conversation. I complimented the floral arrangements. I was the picture of a gracious, slightly boring father of the bride. I watched Eleanor begin her welcome remarks. Her voice was like cut glass. She spoke of tradition, of legacy, of the honor of welcoming a new member into their fold. The hypocrisy was so thick you could taste it. Then the presentations began. Beatrice Harrington, ancient and severe, stood and launched into a rambling monologue about bloodlines and marrying well. She didn't mention Sarah by name, but her meaning was clear. Every eye in the room drifted to my daughter. I saw Sarah's posture stiffen. She was holding her breath. Charlotte was next, a lecture on managing a household that sounded like a job description for a butler. Victoria's turn was the most cutting. She spoke about shedding one's past and embracing a new, more refined identity. She looked directly at Sarah as she said it. The humiliation was a living thing in the room. It was working exactly as they'd planned. I didn't react. I sipped my water. I kept my face a mask of polite interest. Inside, the cold focus was absolute. I was counting down the minutes. My phone, in my jacket pocket, was my detonator. A single text message to my contact in the AV booth was all it would take. Eleanor stood again, a condescending smile on her face. And now, we'd like to open the floor. If anyone has any additional advice or well wishes for our dear Sarah, this was the moment. The room fell into an awkward silence. No one moved. They were all intimidated. This was the Harringtons' show. I stood up. A slight ripple of surprise went through the room. Eleanor's smile tightened. John? How? Lovely. Did you have something to add? I walked to the front of the room. I did not look at Sarah. I could not see the fear in her eyes. I had to be the statue of rage now, unfeeling, unmoving. Thank you, Eleanor, I said, my voice calm and clear, carrying through the silent ballroom. I've been so moved by your family's thoughtful advice. It's given me a lot to think about family, about what we value. I paused, letting the words hang in the air. It inspired me to do a little research of my own, to better know the family my daughter is joining. I'd like to share what I found. I nodded slightly toward the back of the room. That was the signal. The large screen behind me, which had been displaying a soft focus photo of the happy couple, flickered. The image dissolved. A new title slide appeared in the same elegant font as the wedding programs. It read, "A father's advice. Know your new family." A confused murmur ran through the crowd. Eleanor took a step forward. John, what is this? There's been a mistake. No mistake, Eleanor, I said softly, not turning around. Just advice. The slide changed. It showed a simplified financial chart. The heading, Harrington Family Foundation, Administrative Oversight. It highlighted several suspicious transfers, the amounts, the dates. It didn't scream embezzlement. It whispered it far more effectively. I glanced at Sarah. Her eyes were wide, not with fear anymore, but with sharp understanding. The murmur in the room grew louder. Eleanor's face went pale. Turn that off! Someone, turn it off! The screen changed again. Ethereum Networks, a $5 million vision? It showed the damning due diligence report, the words vaporware and founder with fraudulent history, circled in red. Charles, who had been smirking near the bar, suddenly looked like he'd been shot. People were whispering louder now, pointing. I didn't say a word. I just stood there, my hands clasped behind my back as the slides advanced automatically. The next slide was a scanned marriage certificate from 1978. Beatrice Harrington to a man named David Miller. The date of the annulment was 6 months later. Beatrice let out a small, choked sound. Sarah's grip on the table tightened. She was seeing their secrets unravel in real time. Then came the appraisal documents for a diamond necklace, side by side with photos. One was the real heirloom. The other was Charlotte's replica. The appraiser's note was clear. High-quality cubic zirconia. Charlotte put a hand to her throat, where the fake jewels glittered. The room was buzzing with shocked whispers. The final slide was simple. A photograph of Victoria's husband, Stephen, leaving a hotel with a woman who was not his wife. The date stamp was from 2 weeks prior. Victoria stared, her mouth agape. Sarah met my eyes across the room. There was no doubt left in them. The screen went black. The silence in the ballroom was absolute. You could hear a pin drop. The Harrington family was frozen, a tableau of exposed shame. Their perfect world had just been publicly dismantled in under 2 minutes. I turned slowly to face the room. I looked at Eleanor, whose composure had shattered into pure, undiluted fury. I looked at my daughter. The fear in her eyes was gone, replaced by a dawning, fierce understanding. "My advice," I said, my voice still calm, cutting through the silence, "is to be very, very sure of the foundation you're building on before you invite others to stand on it." I walked back to my seat. I did not look at the Harringtons again. The damage was done. It was irreversible. Their social capital, their most prized possession, had just been vaporized in front of the very people whose opinions they valued most. I had not shouted. I had not accused. I had simply presented the facts. And the facts had been the most devastating weapon of all. The silence in that ballroom was a physical presence. It was the sound of a world ending. For a full 10 seconds, nobody moved. Nobody breathed. They were all staring at the blank screen, their minds trying to process the carnage. Then Eleanor Harrington screamed, You vile, vicious old man!" Her voice broke as she shouted. She wasn't elegant anymore. She was just angry and exposed. Charles was the first to move. He lunged toward the AV booth at the back. "Turn it back on! Delete that!" But the technician was already gone, his job complete. Charles started punching buttons on the console, his face a mask of panic and rage. It was useless. That's when the murmuring started, a low, horrified buzz that spread through the guests like a virus. People looked at the Harringtons, then quickly looked away, their faces a mixture of shock and a kind of grim fascination. The perfect facade was gone. They were seeing the cracks, the rot, and in their world, seeing was everything. Mark, the groom, was standing frozen beside Sarah. He looked from his crumbling family to my daughter, his face a battlefield of confusion and dawning horror. "Mom? Charles? What was that?" he stammered, but nobody answered him. Beatrice had buried her face in her hands. Charlotte was frantically trying to unclasp the fake necklace from her throat. Victoria was sobbing, screaming at her husband. "Is it true? Stephen, tell me it's not true." The brunch was over. There was no recovering from this. The event had transformed from a coronation into a public execution. And I was not the executioner. I had merely handed them the axes they used on themselves. I stood up. I walked over to Sarah. She was still sitting, but she was standing tall inside. I could see it in her eyes. The fear was gone, replaced by a cold, clear understanding. She looked at me, and a single tear traced a path down her cheek. But it wasn't a tear of sadness. It was a tear of release. I offered her my arm. "Shall we go, sweetheart?" She took it, her grip firm. We walked out of the ballroom together, through the gauntlet of stunned faces. We didn't look back. The door closed behind us, sealing the Harringtons in with the ruin of their own making. The battle was won. But the war for my daughter's future was just beginning. The quiet of the car was a stark contrast to the chaos we left behind. Sarah didn't speak for the first 10 minutes. She just stared out the window, her hand still gripping mine. Then her phone started buzzing. "Mark, again and again, 17 times. She looked at it, watched the screen light up with his name, and then she did something I'll never forget. She turned it off. Not just silenced it. Off. That simple action, that was her taking her life back. Finally, she turned to me. Her voice was quiet but steady. "Did you know everything? All of it?" "I knew enough," I said. "I knew their intention. The details were just supporting evidence." She was silent again, absorbing this. "They were going to destroy me," she whispered, not as a question, but as a final accepted fact. They were always going to try, I corrected gently. The only variable was our response. Mark called her phone 17 times on the drive home. She let it go to voicemail each time. The finality of that action, the simple act of not answering, was more powerful than any screaming match. She was drawing a line. The engagement was over before we even reached our driveway. It wasn't a decision made in anger. It was a conclusion reached with cold, brutal clarity. She had seen the foundation of the life she was supposed to build, and it was rotten. The fallout in the following days was swift and merciless, just as I'd calculated. The Harrington name, their most prized asset, became toxic. The society pages, which had been preparing glowing features on the wedding of the season, now ran veiled, gleeful items about family troubles and unfortunate pre-wedding disclosures. The financial implications began to cascade. Investors pulled out of Charles's ventures. The foundation donors demanded an audit. Their world, built on perception, was collapsing because the perception had irrevocably shifted. I received one phone call. It was from Eleanor Harrington. Her voice was stripped of all its former condescension. It was raw, stripped bare. It was the voice of someone who had lost everything that mattered to her. "You ruined us," she hissed. There was no threat in it, just a stark, horrified statement of fact. "No, Eleanor," I replied, my voice flat. "You provided the ruination. I merely turned on the lights so everyone could see it." I hung up. There was nothing more to say. I got one phone call from Eleanor Harrington. Her voice was different now. All the fancy talk was gone. "You ruined us," she said. "No, Eleanor," I replied. "You did that. I just showed everyone what you really are." The fallout was swift. Within days, the Harrington name became toxic. Investors pulled out of Charles's deals. Charity donors demanded an audit. Their world, built on what people thought of them, fell apart because people's opinions changed. And it happened without me saying another word. Sarah moved her studio out of the city a month later. She needed the quiet. The last time I visited, she was working on a new painting. It wasn't the bright, hopeful colors she used to use. It was darker, more complex. A landscape with a foundation of cracked earth, but with defiant, resilient flowers breaking through the fissures. She was healing. She was rebuilding on her own terms. The door clicked shut behind her that day at the Crestmore. There was no going back. And that was the point. If you want to see more stories about protecting what matters, about the quiet application of consequence, subscribe to Elder Vengeance. The world is full of people who mistake kindness for weakness. It's a lesson they only need to learn once.